So he was like banging on the door and ringing the doorbell. And it's like 10 o'clock at night. I'm literally in bed with Winston. And it's scary because when people are under the influence of such hard drugs, they're unpredictable and you just don't know what's going to happen next. And if they have a weapon, you just don't know. So it's sad. It's sad. And I've helped him before in certain ways, like let him plug in his phone to my electrical at the house so he could get a charge on his phone. He used to ask me for money all the time, which I only gave him money one time in like 3 years. I gave him like $5, I remember, because I understand as somebody who is married to an addict that there's a very fine line between kindness and enabling somebody. And unfortunately, I know how to walk that line. You can show somebody kindness and compassion and empathy without enabling them. But it's very heartbreaking to see somebody just go completely off the deep end, especially when you thought that they were already there.
So I'm going to talk in this video about why I personally believe van life is safer than living in the suburbs. And if you live in the suburbs, hear me out, because I've been living in the suburbs my entire life in like really nice neighborhoods, mind you. I get a lot of people who are concerned about me, like doing van life, when I'm camped out in the forest alone or wherever. Before I even started like camping with people and with friends and really making super close van life friends, I was solo on the road for 2.5 years. Um, and it's very rare that I get scared. And I started thinking about something last week because, and I'm going to clean my van while I talk about this a little bit. Um, Jordan and Jim, the two guys that I live with, were out of town last week. So I was at the house, and I live in the suburbs in a golf course community. You'd think it'd be fairly safe, right? Um, I suppose there's probably a reasonable amount of crime just like anywhere these days. But that's the first time I've actually like been at the house by myself in quite a while. And the first night that they were out of town that I was alone, I was like, man, I'm in this house by myself. If somebody breaks in, God forbid I have to use my firearm. But like robberies, burglaries, they just happen randomly, right? In neighborhoods, people break into houses. They're drinking, they're on drugs, they're just evil people, just trying to break in. Like that could happen. And it's happened to me before. I lived in a gated golf course community when I was younger. I was 17, so I was still living at home with my parents, right? Um, we had people trying to break into the house. My car was broken into twice in the driveway. When I was 17 years old, I was going to head to school. My car was in the garage. My mom had just gotten home from taking my brother to school. And I was like, oh, leave the garage open because I'm going to take my car. I'm going to go to school. 5 minutes later, not even 5 minutes later, I walked outside and there was a man in my garage stealing our tools. I was a 17-year-old girl, a senior in high school, and I ran after that fucking guy. I ran after him and his car. He was driving a 1999 white Dodge Intrepid, license plate 182 TPS. I ran after him. Don't violate my house. Don't steal my stuff. I don't care how old I'm 17. The cops showed up. Oh, you shouldn't have run after him. I don't care. I'm protecting my stuff. I'm protecting my family. Like, I've always been that type of woman. So, yeah, my fearlessness goes back a long time. I've been more violated in the suburbs than I have in van life. you're around so many people and so much activity. It's much riskier than being in a van in the middle of the forest. Like, what's going to happen? Especially up here. We don't have like really dangerous animals where I'm at right now that are going to pose a threat, like bears and big cats and things like that. We just don't have that here. You know, we have some raccoons and some deer. The likelihood of something bad happening to me out here is so much lower than something happening in the suburbs, in the city, where there's people, where there's civilization, where people are on drugs, people are under the influence, people are crazy. Sure, you hear about stuff happening, uh, you know, every now and then, van life, camping, you know, freak things. A lot of times it's domestic, people getting hurt, killed, murdered by their significant others. That's more of a risk than being alone out here. So when people worry about me, I just think it's funny because I'm much more fearful in the suburbs, much more fearful. Because you just never know. You never know when someone's going to break in, or I'm always worried about my van being broken into in the driveway. Um, Something happening to my van being vandalized in the driveway. And like I said, I live in a decent neighborhood, but it doesn't matter. I've lived in decent neighborhoods my entire life, and things happen. People just, criminals don't care. They don't discriminate. And they're going to go to the nice places too. You know, it's like, you don't have to be in the ghetto. Like, people are going to, if they want stuff, they're going to target the nice areas. They don't care if there's cameras and everything. That's not going to stop people. I think van life is much safer than living in civilization. And, you know, with my neighbor, my old neighbor, it was sad because the incident with my neighbor really breaks my heart. He lived there, so we've been living in our house for a little over 3 years now. And that neighbor had lived there for, I think he said, and I don't know what was truth and what was not from him, but that neighbor, he told me he had been living in that house for about 10 years, and he was always, you know, he was always drunk. He was always under the influence of something. I even like have recordings of him talking to me while he was like super drunk. I could smell the tequila like on his breath. And I have a feeling that like I always hoped that he would change his life around and like get sober and would have like a support system, because I have a feeling that he could be like a really, I'm sure he's a really good man, under all of the trauma and the substance abuse that has taken over his life. But unfortunately, whether you're a good person or not, when you are under the influence of especially hard drugs like meth, let's say, um, you don't know what you're doing. You know, I've heard I watch a lot of crime shows and hear about a lot of true crime, and a lot of times you hear about these people going on like murderous rampages, and they're under the influence of some sort of substance. You're much more likely to be a victim of something like that when you're living in suburbia or in the city surrounded by a bunch of flippin' people. And I was always a little bit worried about the neighbor just because he brought a lot of shady people to his house, you know, drug dealers and, you know, the like. And you don't know what they're going to do. You just don't know. So, hey, Bubba. The other thing is, too, it's like I have a very dear friend who lives in a rural community. They all have like 1 to 4 acres. So they're houses, but they're spread out. And he has a very dangerous woman living down the street from him. She is deranged and she is delusional to the point where he's literally he has to move. Like, he has to move. In van life, if you get somebody that pulls up to you who's delusional and deranged, you can literally just drive off. But this person has to move. He has to sell his house because she's so dangerous and psychotic. That's a risk that you face in the suburbs. I am much more fearful of crazy neighbors and things like that happening. It's so common, than having a crazy neighbor or somebody during van life. Like, the closest people to me are pretty far away right now. But if someone were to pull up to me and I felt a bad vibe or something was popping, I just turn on my engine and I drive away. You can't drive your house away. You can't help who moves in next to you or down the street, right? So I really kind of put it into perspective for myself last week when I was at the house and I was like, man, there's no Jim or Jordan here. Granted, I can protect myself. Again, I'm trained with firearms. I'm not afraid to use my weapon to defend myself if, God forbid, I end up in the situation where I have to. But at the same time, whenever I'm at the house, it's not anything I think about because somebody who like broke in would literally have to get through Jordan, and Jordan and Jim are not small dudes, so like they'll mess you up. Like they're big dudes. Like Jordan is extremely trained with a number of different firearms, and Jim is a military veteran. So for somebody to have to get to me, they'd have to go through those lines of defenses first. Um, but you know, when I'm by myself, and granted, I lived on my own for a long time. I lived by myself in different apartments, and I was never really that worried. But I've almost become a little more mindful and aware of the risks now of being in a house now that I've done van life because I just feel safer in my vehicle, knowing that I'm away from people. The further you are away from people, the less you are at risk. That's ultimately why I think that van life is safer than living in the suburbs. Again, you can have cameras and gated community and all that stuff all day. But if somebody on drugs or some evil criminal person monster wants to break into your house and hurt you and steal your stuff, like they're going to do it. So I choose van life. Much more fun too, you know? If you're one of those people who's just kind of afraid to start van life because you're afraid of the safety portion, think about what I said. You know, just kind of put it into perspective. It can be new, especially when you're out in the forest or the desert and there's no city lights and it's like pitch black at night. That can kind of bring up some fearful thoughts. But just remember that the likelihood of somebody, you know, just like randomly hurting you or attacking you or when you're camping, it's very rare. Very rare. You're safer out here. I'm going to stick with that. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.